Welcome to Moffett on Money. I'm Clay. Glad to be with you once again. Had a kind of an interesting week, fun week. A lot of comments on my previous video, and one of the questions concerned my background. So I gave a response and was told it was a great response. I should I should use it more often. So for those of you interested in kind of where I come from, I was a portfolio manager, structured private placements for about 20 years and then worked as a bond and derivatives trader for a large bank. And then about 12 years ago, I got my PhD and have been in an academic setting since. So, in a nutshell, that's my life, my professional career. Hope that hope that was interesting and exciting to you. Now, today we're going to do something a little bit different than normal. It's been said, and I don't know who said it first, but it's been said you can't write about economics every day without going crazy. And you can't write about investing or finance every day without driving your readers crazy. So I'm not aiming to make you crazy or insane. And so occasionally going to throw in some videos or topics that I think are fuller, richer, maybe even more important, as it were. So what could be richer and fuller and more important than the totality of human drama, good or bad? Human drama, we love it. Human interactions, human passions, what makes people feel alive, whether it's angry, happy, joy, love, whatever, what makes them passionate? These are the kind of subjects which I believe propel us forwards or backwards on occasion, is why I always take the time and point out in my classes that the three most important topics in the world are sex, religion, and politics. Now, sex. I'm not talking about the physical act, but I'm talking about the relationship between two people who are in love. What is the number one problem that couples have, that people have? Money. Religion. What major religion is out there that doesn't have a significant portion of its teachings on money? And then politics. What what greases the wheels for politicians? So in almost every area of life, how people treat and relate to their money is a huge tell about what they value and things that make them passionate. Now, before we go any further, you've met Chunk or seen Chunk and Tallulah before, and they are very insistent that I remind you to, like, subscribe, do those YouTubey things that will help propel this page forward if you find this information valuable or of use to you. So that's the goal. Now, I believe all great drama is derived from passionate human interactions, whether it's greed, fear, hope, peer pressure, insanity, all these things are a part of the human experience. So today we continue our explorations in these areas with an idea, with a slight hat tip to money and investing in finance. But to me, that's why I love finance. It encompasses the areas of life, the things that drive and propel us. It's just one thing it is the one thing that impacts most every area of our life to some shape, manner, form, or degree. So today I thought we'd examine a great and powerful movement that's encompassing all of these interactions that are occurring now, right before our eyes, though very few are aware of it. This topic is actually the first topic that a former student suggested I direct the channel towards. He suggested I cover it, and several other followers have also mentioned the same. So we're going to cover it. We're going to look at the paradigm shifting force referred to as the Great Reset. What is it? How does it impact you? And how do you prepare or profit from it? Now, I started off talking about passions. And what is more passionate than war or rumors of war or great societal conflict? Historically, our most passionate time or conflict was the Civil War. The scars and the anger were so deep that it still inspires emotional responses from people if you bring up the topic or subject. We understand today it was fueled by two sides diametrically opposed to each other who really sought to agitate the other side at every opportunity. And today, we see increasing anger, rage, division, protest, violent ones oftentimes in this country and around the world. US, Europe, China, Indonesia, Africa. There is economic chaos around the world. There's energy shortages, there's food shortages, there's political change occurring. So, what is driving all of this anger or chaos? I am somewhat of a history fan, history buff, I guess I would say. And to me, I continually see history repeating itself. The chaos ultimately has an end goal. There are ultimately forces driving it. Now, there may be different goals for each opposing side in the various conflicts, but there is something driving the chaos. Today, we're going to look at one major force, the Great Reset, or as I describe it, turning back the clock on civilization. So, what is the Great Reset? It is not, as some propose, at least in my opinion, it's not a grand conspiracy theory, but rather it's a dedicated group, a very dedicated group, if I may say, of powerful people, of moneyed people, of politicians, of bankers, world leaders, dedicated to the idea of reordering the concept of authority and power in the world. Obviously, reordered the way they want, but they work extremely effectively at trying to compel governments, other governments, and companies to participate in this grand reordering. Now, the Grand Reset is not a conspiracy to try to establish a totalitarian one world government, though many condense it to such. But it is an extremely powerful movement, impacting and transforming cultures, values, and traditions all over the world. That's part of the reason for the chaos and the anger. These transformational efforts, coordinated efforts, are not the result of chance, but of plans and committed individuals. So, who drives this? It's not a shady cabal, but an actual, visible, out in the open economic organization that dominates and influences international policy. The organization is known as the WEF, World Economic Foundation, and the leader is a guy by the name of Klaus Schwab. Good timing for the topic here because they are having their major international conference this week. And here we see their webpage where they are highlighting the annual meeting, 16th of January, 23, with the speakers Hilda Schwab, Sabrina Dowry Elba, Maya Lin, Idris Elba, and Renfee Fleming. May not be familiar with any or all of those, but there'll be many that you are familiar with. And we'll look at some of those as we go through. Now, their stated goal seeks to unify the world. Unify it, not necessarily under one government, but perhaps one ideology. To make it in their words, a more and better sustainable place. Now, the concerns surround social justice, diversity, and sustainability. Who can argue against those noble goals? It kind of reminds me somewhat of a beauty pageant or beauty contest in the old days when, everyone would stand up and smile and wave and say, I support world peace. Who can be opposed to that? It's such an innocuous and friendly sounding language. What can be scary about that? Who can be opposed to that? Well, as always, the devil is in the details. A little history. The Great Reset was first used in a book in 2010 by urban studies scholar Richard Florida. He described the long depression of the 1870s, the Great Depression, the subprime crisis of 2008 as paradigm shifting events, a great reset of policy and systemic innovation. So that's kind of the first use of the word. 4 years later, Schwab, in a conference in Davos, stated the goal of the meeting was to, quote, push the reset button, hence the name Great Reset. Now, in 2019 or 2020, Schwab and Mallard published a book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, where he defined the Great Reset as a means to address the weakness of capitalism. His words, not mine. To him, the COVID pandemic represented an opportunity to reorder the world, and he argued leaders should seize the moment. Don't let a good crisis go to waste right before your eyes. Now, in his own words, here's what he wrote. Structural changes in our consumption behavior. If in the post-pandemic era we desire to resume our lives just as before by driving the same cars, note that, by flying to the same destinations, by eating the same things, by heating our house the same way, the COVID crisis will have gone to waste as far as climate policies are concerned. Conversely, if some of the habits we were forced to adopt during the pandemic translate into structural changes, the climate outcome might be different. He lays it out pretty clearly for you there. And in terms of politicians embracing this opportunity, here's Canada's Prime Minister Trudeau giving his opinions and thoughts.
Back means getting support to the most vulnerable while maintaining our momentum on reaching the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs. Canada is here to listen and to help. This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
So there you have one modestly influential politician actually just repeating almost verbatim Schwab's ideas and concepts. Trudeau is a very strong supporter of the Great Reset, one among many. Now, Schwab in his book detailed what he referred to as stakeholder capitalism. Remember, his issue, his goal was to correct, or how can I say this, to undo the damage of capitalism. So he came up with what he called stakeholder capitalism, where he argued the management of modern enterprise must serve not only the shareholders, but all stakeholders to achieve long-term growth and prosperity. The WEF and members have sought to promote this ever since. Now, what's a stakeholder? A stakeholder it's a very broad term, but it could include suppliers, customers, employees, anybody that has a stake in the company. That can include government officials who, benefit by tax receipts, or, other relationships, even remote or distant from the company, who benefit indirectly. Now, so what is the Great Reset and stakeholder capitalism? It's kind of hard to describe. We'll spend literally the next few videos trying to give you a better understanding of that, but it's a somewhat bewildering amalgam of concepts which Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben called communist capitalism. Kind of an interesting term. Schwab's vision of the future, basically, and this is what he describes, is the very close cooperation between government and corporations, a few large corporations. This combination will then make decisions and govern their respective domains. Now, we've actually seen this in history before. In Italy, under Mussolini, what Mussolini defined as fascism. He described fascism as the perfect marriage of corporations and state. Now, not trying to stir up, some sort of implication with World War II, just using Mussolini's own description. And the idea was pretty much the same. There were a few large corporations that were favored. Mussolini ran the government with the input of the corporations, and he tried to, marry the two together. That is basically what Schwab is saying he wants to do. Now, the concept involves behavioral modification of corporations to benefit not the shareholders, but the stakeholders, which is a pretty significant change, actually. Individuals and groups that stand to benefit or lose from corporate behavior. So Klaus's vision requires not only corporate responses to pandemics and ecological issues such as climate change, for example, which is a big one for the Great Reset folks, but also rethinking corporations' commitments to already vulnerable communities within their ecosystems. Now, all of this is a lot of verbiage to describe a refocusing of companies' attention and priorities away from economic issues or cash flow towards societal good, which, some people may think is a good thing. But when you invest, let's shuck it down to the cob. When you invest, why do you invest? Do you invest to make money? Yes, it's why everybody invests. They want a stock or an asset that will increase in value. They invest for cash flow. Now, some people also want companies that are principled or, follow certain social mores, and that's fine. They can choose. But ultimately, you want a company that makes money. There have been a lot of companies who didn't focus on cash flow, who focused on other goals or targets. A recent one would be FTX, for example. Very prominent in the ESG, in the social community, and, a proponent of the Great Reset, so to speak, but ran a very poor company, had very poor operations because they didn't pay attention to cash flow. Cash is king. Businesses survive based on their cash flow. Should they really take their focus off of that? Should that not be their primary focus? I remember a, story once about Eli Lilly, the founders of Eli Lilly, two pharmacists, hired other pharmacists to help compound the medicines that they were making. And they had one come to them at some point in time and said, I found this way to compound this one drug cheaper. It works almost as good, but we'll make more profit on it. And at that point in time, Eli turned to Lilly and said, Mr. Lilly, would you please drop this man's check? We have no further use for his services. And Lilly responded and said, you're too late. I've already started. You can focus, and companies should focus on cash. But the way they do that best is by improving their product and offering value to consumers. Why do you buy a certain product? Because it offers the best value to you. You go to the grocery store, you've got 50 different choices of bread. Well, which one are you going to buy? Maybe it's the cheapest because you don't care about all the other flavors and grains and stuff. Or maybe you want one that's got 50 grains in it. Maybe you want one that's pumpernickel, whatever. You choose the one that represents the best value to you. So just because companies focus on cash and trying to make operations more efficient and improve the value of their products so more consumers want it, that's a good thing. And that's how the economy has prospered. That's how the middle class grew, how the middle class rose up into the upper class, how the poor rose into the middle class. Economic expansion. That is what has worked for 150 years. Now, Klaus, is saying, forget that. We need to refocus on sustainability. It needs to be the top priority. And we'll look at that as we go through. Now, there is a social justice aspect also to the Great Reset. To encourage participation, government, banks, asset managers, for example, will use this new standard that's referred to as the Environmental, Social, and Government Index, ESG, as it's oftentimes referred to, ESG. The ESG index is essentially a non-economic social credit score that is used to drive ownership and control of production away from those who care about cash flow. Again, maybe doesn't sound so bad, does it? I end up thinking of it like the beauty contest. Say the right words. I want world peace. A good example of this would be BlackRock's Larry Fink. And who's BlackRock? Well, BlackRock is the largest asset management firm in the world, managing probably about $10 million worth of assets. Sorry, $10 trillion worth of assets, not million. Now, Fink is the CEO and is a huge proponent of the Great Reset and ESG. In fact, he's on the board of the WEF. If we look at, and let's do this quickly, let's look at the WEF's page. They have their board pictures posted on the front page. And some of the names you might know. Here's Fink, chairman and CEO of BlackRock. You've got here Freeland, who's the Deputy Prime Minister in Finance of Canada. You've got the Chief Executive Officer of Salesforce. So you go through and you can tell these are some pretty influential people. Managing Director, the International Monetary Fund, Director General, European Organization for Nuclear Research, CERN. Al Gore, well-known former VP of the US. Going on down, you've got Chairman of Siemens Energy. You've got Christine Lagarde, the President of the European Central Bank. You've got Director General, World Trade Organization, the WTO. You just go down and you see these people. Chief Executive Officer, Nestle. Chief, co-founder and chairman, Carlyle. President, MIT. These are people who are extremely influential, powerful, well-connected, politically, financially, whatever. And these are the people shaping much of the values. Now, Larry Fink obviously is one of those. Fink has stated, we have long believed that our clients, as shareholders in your company, will benefit if you can create enduring, sustainable value for all your stakeholders. As more and more investors choose to tilt their investments towards sustainability-focused companies, the tectonic shift we are seeing will accelerate further. And because this will have such a dramatic impact on how capital is allocated, every management team and board will need to consider how they will impact their company's stock. So Fink is basically, fired a shot across the bow of these companies, telling them that if you don't embrace his ideology, if you don't embrace ESG and the priorities therein, you won't receive capital. That's a pretty strong statement. Now, am I the only one? Anybody else think of FTX reading this? I mean, it was a clear shout out to corporate America. The nation's largest investor cares more about your ESG score than your cash flows. And need I remind you, FTX had a better ESG score than Exxon. How'd that work out for them? Again, your ESG is a non-economic, non-financial metric used to evaluate companies. It's almost wholly devoid of reality in its application, my opinion. Now, in his book, Klaus argues against a corpus of ideas. He favors corporate and government solidarity over competition. He favors government intervention over creative destruction. What's creative destruction? Creative destruction is the process of old technologies dying off and new technologies replacing them. It's innovation. For example, at the turn of the 1900s, the United States had the world's largest horse and buggy manufacturers. Well, there was this new invention called the automobile, and it was noisy, it smoked, it, was expensive, just kind of a newfangled device, but it threatened horse and buggy manufacturers. So what do you think would have happened to the US if the government, to protect horse and buggy manufacturers, had outlawed the automobile or implemented regulations which made it much more expensive, much more difficult to produce, on and on and on? What if the government had protected horse and buggy manufacturing? Well, 50 years, 100 years later, we'd have the world's largest horse and buggy manufacturers still, but we'd be a third world country. That's the process of creative destruction. If you had an investment or worked for a horse and buggy manufacturer, it was painful. You lost your job, you lost your investment over time if you didn't change. But think of all the jobs created by automobile manufacturers and parts suppliers and repairmen and auto shops and gasoline suppliers, et cetera, et cetera. What was created far, far surpassed what was replaced. And that's the process of creative destruction. So Schwab prefers government intervention. Think protectionism versus innovation, creative destruction. He also prefers social welfare over economic growth. Now, my opinion is social welfare is enhanced when you have economic growth. Social welfare is worsened when you have no economic growth. Now, take a minute and really consider what Schwab is saying. Their slogan is, "You will own nothing and be happy. You will own nothing and you'll like it." Solidarity, uniting a few large corporations with governments. Monopolies, basically. How do you think that'll work out? Schwab is very anti-small business in his policies. He wants to vest control over production and distribution to a few companies while eliminating what he calls non-essential producers. His word for it is transforming industry. Now, mom and pop businesses, startups, new companies are the people who create the jobs in our economy. It's not the large corporation that create the jobs. It's the new startup companies. Just imagine where we would be if Microsoft, Apple, Dell, Gateway, Cisco, Intel hadn't started in the late 70s. If there was no Amazon in the US, so on and so forth. It is the new startup companies that create the jobs and propel the economy forward, improve the standard of living for people. Now, government intervention over creative destruction. Talked about that. Social welfare over economic growth. Social welfare over economic growth. This is the spreading of misery equally. Bottom line, without economic growth, the only other alternative in history, without economic growth, the only alternative in history is increasing poverty and dependence on the government. Every one of these ideas shift from economic performance metrics to what has traditionally been collectivist slogans. And that's the goal of the Great Reset. That is the clear, unstated goal of the Great Reset, moving away from the individual to the collective. This is a good example of where ideology becomes life. Policies have a huge impact on our lives. The opportunities we have, the ability to pursue one's own happiness, which has been a distinguishing characteristic of the United States for 220 years. You know, I'm reminded of Ayn Rand's quote that when you see that in order to produce, you need to obtain permission from men who produce nothing. When you see that money is flowing to those who deal not in goods, but in favors, when you see that men get rich more easily by graft than by work, and your laws no longer protect you against them, but protect them against you, you may know that your society is doomed. In part two, we're going to do things a little different. We're not going to do one, very long video. We're going to cut this up into 3 or 4 different videos. So in part two, we'll take a look at who is the Great Reset and what are their accomplishments. Thank you for your time.